site director for the Center for Global Education and Experience at Augsburg College in my home state of Minnesota. We're Tokayas. We're both named Ann, and we're both from Minneapolis. At Augsburg, she teaches women's studies and religion. Now, she does that, she was telling me, by bringing the study abroad students here. So she's working for Augsburg here in Mexico. She received her doctorate in international feminist theologies from the San Francisco Theological Seminary at UC Berkeley, and earned her Master's of Divinity with a focus on liberation theologies from Yale Divinity School. So we have UC Berkeley, Yale, Harvard, Stanford. I mean, feeling great energy in the room. Anne has worked with a wide range of nonprofits advocating peace, women's rights, LGBTQ rights, and human rights in general. She is proudly a dual citizen of Mexico and the United States, and she has lived and worked in Cuernavaca for the past 23 years, where she has facilitated workshops and courses to help empower Mexican women. She has worked closely with Catholics for the Right to Decide in Mexico, and is a founding member of Evangelical and Protestant Mexican Women for the Right to Decide. Both of those groups advocate the decriminalization of abortion. In addition, Anne actively participates in the Ecumenical Association of Mexican Theologians, which is a center for ecumenical and interfaith dialogue and activism, as well as the Confederation of Feminist Theologians and Researchers of Mexico. Now listen to these organizations. These were translated into English from, the names of these organizations are really in Spanish. They exist here. I think that's progress. And so, and Anne is the founder of one of those. As I mentioned, Anne's topic today is Life in Abundance for All Women, a discussion about Mexican women's struggle for freedom from violence and for sexual and reproductive rights. She's going to share some very startling statistics, but also the stories of creative actions taken by women to change the world so that all women can lead lives of abundance with full human rights. Now, this is going to be an interactive presentation, so I'm going to be asked to help distribute some props here in a minute. Anne is also going to tell us about some national and local groups in Mexico, such as Mariposas, that give us all an opportunity to learn more and to get involved. So we don't just have to sit and watch the films and cry about it. We can do something about it. Please welcome Anne Lutterman-Aguilar.
Thank you for that warm introduction, and I want to thank everyone for your comments and questions that are really terrific after the powerful film that we watched. I think that was a very moving way to start our conversation about sexual and reproductive rights in Latin America, and as Cliff reminded us, kind of around the world, right? This is not just an issue for Guatemala or for Mexico, it's also in the United States and many, many, many places. I think the film does a beautiful job of making the connections between poverty, lack of education, and lack of sexual and reproductive rights. You know, we can really see how those come together. And when I was looking at some of those very poor young women, it made me think of how my own paternal grandmother was one of 22 children. I think 4 of them died as infants, but still my great-grandmother, whom I never met, had all these children. They were peasant farmers, right? This was in Europe, but you know, it was poverty. And so many of the countries of the world that are wealthy nations today went through histories where people who were extremely poor kept having many, many children because you needed children to work on your farm. You didn't know how many children were going to survive to make it to adulthood or would take care of you in your old age, right? So I think the same kinds of patterns happen in place after place after place, as many of us have seen and experienced. I am going to get into the religious issues because, as you heard from Anne, some of my background is in religion, so I'm really interested in how religion intersects with issues of reproductive and sexual rights, right? And what people are doing, because it's not all bad, in my opinion. So I have some things that I want to share, as Anne had said, but I really want this to be interactive. So as you have questions, you have comments, please just raise a hand so that I see you, so that we can talk together, okay? ¿Cómo hago el primero? Para que sea el primero nada más. Ya. I think that the women we saw in the film about Guatemala were great examples of women who were changing the world together little by little. And I think that the women on the committee of Ser Mujer who chose that film and who planned all the activities this month are also women who are examples of people working together to change the world. So before anything else, please let's give them a round of applause, okay? If you are one of the people who helped choose today's film, can you raise your hand?
We didn't hear this.
All right. If you helped choose today's film, if you helped select it. Thank you. Oops, didn't mean to do that.
Oh no, this isn't gonna work.
Okay.
Do you want those off?
Yeah, get those off.
Please.
Baja las luces, por favor.
So a little bit, I think, came out in the film, not necessarily
Gracias.
Explicitly, but definitely implicitly, is that when we talk about sexual and reproductive rights, we're talking about many different things, right? And some of us focus more on one aspect, others on another. But I like to think holistically about sexual rights as including sex education, right? So you have the right and ability and access to knowledge about your body and about your sexuality and your reproductive system, etc.
Oh, no.
That you have the right to affirm whatever sexual orientation you have, and for that to not be punished. And you have the right to have autonomy in making sexual decisions. So no other human being should be making those for you or imposing those upon you, right? Those are some very basic kinds of things that most nations agree on in terms of sexual rights. And you know, pictures from here in Mexico, Mexico City, the Pride Parade that happens near the end of June every year around the time of Stonewall. People go from all over the country with busloads of people to go and to celebrate, and recognizing, you know, now in Mexico City, full same-sex marriage is legislated, and it now includes adoption and it includes Social Security benefits for one's spouse. Okay. So yay! They actually beat those of us who are from the United States to that. Yeah. So, sexual rights, as I said, also include the right to and access to contraceptive methods. It's not enough just to know about it, that they exist, but you need to be able to actually find them, afford them, and use them, right? Unlike what we learned about Guatemala in the film, Mexico in general is much more contraceptive friendly. The federal government supports women and men's right to use contraception. Most state governments do, and in pharmacies you can often find many different kinds of contraceptions. What's very difficult and very expensive is the female condom, but male condoms, you know, are readily available. They are supposed to be free in the DEEF clinics, so government-sponsored clinics and other healthcare centers are supposed to have them for free. But what do you think happens? What's your experience? Do they have them?
No.
They run out, right? So it's a problem. And you need to have people who are vigilant, who are making sure that the resources that Mexican tax dollars go for are actually getting back down to those clinics, so that the people who want to have access to contraception have access to free contraception, because they're supposed to. But oftentimes what happens is people can't get it in their local clinics, or because of the social and religious stigma that often exists, they're afraid to ask for it, right? And so that is a big barrier, it's a problem. So then what are the other options? Going and purchasing these things. And there's, like you can see here, there's the patch, there's all kinds of different things that you can use, and most of them are readily available in pharmacies in bigger towns and cities. But rural areas, almost not available, right? So you end up with huge discrepancies between what women and men in rural communities have access to and people in bigger towns, cities, urban areas do. Anybody ever check out what the current price of condoms is here in San Miguel?
It's expensive.
Yeah.
Very expensive.
So a pack of 3 in Cuernavaca, the cheapest brand that I could find recently in a pharmacy, you know, nothing fancy. We're not talking ribbed, we're not talking fancy colors, you know, none of that. But a pack of 3 was 25 pesos. Now, what is the minimum wage here in San Miguel, you know, for a day, for 8 to 9 hours of labor? Yeah, that's what it is in our state, in Morelos. And so 25 is, you know, it's more than a third of what a day's wage would be. So again, if you're poor and you don't have access to this in your local clinic, which you have a right to, which the government is supposed to be giving money for, then you have to pay a really large amount of your salary. Are you going to do that? Because maybe you also have to, you know, you have to pay for food, and you have to pay transportation, and you have other costs. So condoms is not your only cost. So sadly, condoms, you know, while they are available in some government clinics, they are largely at the disposal of people who have more middle income and higher level jobs and salaries, right? So, and we find that, you know, that happens probably around the world too, right? But at least it's not illegal here. You know, people have a right, and more people know that they have a right to it. So, you know, we have issues between the theory. In theory, all Mexicans ought to have access to sex education and to free contraception. Practice, not that way, right? The accessibility, the stigma, the cost, all those things are important. And those are things that we can help people do things about, right? So the struggle here is, like in many places, and I apologize for the typo, I meant to take out the E, but somehow it didn't get saved. Decriminalization of abortion. Big issue here, okay? Because there are times when, even despite people's best efforts at using contraceptions, they end up getting pregnant and are not in a position to be able to have that child, right? And I can't remember what I was going to say about that, but
I have a
yes.
question. In the state of Guanajuato,
Yep.
women were imprisoned
Yes.
because they were thought to have had an abortion.
Yep.
And the group Las Libres worked to get them out of prison.
Yes.
Is that happening in other parts of the country?
Yes, and I will come back to that, but that's a great example because as it shows here, abortion is illegal actually in all 32 states. Now more and more people in the federal government are including Mexico City as a state because it has full rights of statehood. Some, you know, still say 31 plus Mexico City, but either way, you know, that's more than half the, well, all of the states, it's illegal, but they're, except for Mexico City, with some exceptions that I'll get to in a moment. But yes, there are groups, almost all over the country in that I know of, 26 states, groups that are actively working to change things. They don't all have the kind of legal clinic that Las Libres has in Guanajuato, but they also don't all have as repressive situation as Guanajuato has, because as we'll come back to a little bit further on, you all know Guanajuato is one of the most conservative states in the country when it comes to these issues, and has some of the most restrictive legislation.
And
Yes?
so part of that is, rumor has it that if someone from Guanajuato goes to Mexico City, has an abortion, comes back to Guanajuato, they'll be incarcerated.
That's a rumor. It would be really interesting to talk to Las Libres and their criminal, their legal center, because I think their Center for Legal Rights really does a lot of good work in helping people, not only the women who were in prison and getting them out, but others who are facing charges like that. I don't think they're actually supposed to be able to be charged when they come back here if they had a legal abortion in Mexico City. The way I understand it from lawyers who work in these issues is that, for example, with the same-sex marriages, you can go to Mexico City and have a same-sex wedding, and then you can go back to Jalisco, or you can go back to anywhere else, Yucatan, and it's still valid, right? You still have certain rights. My understanding is that Guanajuato is not supposed to imprison you. Where it has happened, I know in some other states, particularly in Guerrero, Oaxaca, Chiapas, some other locations where people have gone to Mexico City, had a free and legal abortion, gone home, is where they've had a complication afterwards. You know, not as serious as often happens in the clandestine illegal abortions, but still, you know, complications can happen. So somebody starts having some hemorrhaging. They go to a doctor in their home state where abortion is illegal in all cases, and suddenly they're arrested. And coming back to the question that Trish raised, not only in Guanajuato, but around the country, there are cases where there are girls and women who have had a miscarriage who are accused of having had a provoked abortion. You probably all know that the word in Spanish is the same, right? Aborto can be miscarriage or it can be abortion, right? So one is an induced one and the other one is a spontaneous one. But yeah, there's lots of issues around that. So in Mexico City, the law that was passed in 2007 was record-breaking for the nation and for much of Latin America. It was one of the very first laws to approve of, or to allow, not only for legal, but publicly funded abortion through the first 12 weeks of gestation, right? Without asking why. So you didn't have to have any particular reasons why you were seeking this. They weren't allowed to ask you. You could just, for any reason, say, this is what I need to do, and do it. Now, there's pressure outside. You can still go to clinics in Mexico City, and there are the so-called pro-life mobiles that will show films to people that, of course, are to terrorize women and their partners, and to just really scare them, and fetuses that are 8 months, not 2 to 3 months, but still. So there's pressure, but the government tries to clear a way so that people can go in safely to those clinics, and we have not had the kinds of bombings that have happened in U.S. abortion clinics and things. Yeah.
And
Yes.
could you explain the politics behind why it's legal in Mexico City and not other places?
Yep. Great question. Well, let me just come back to that maybe in one slide, if that's okay.
Sure.
So I want to talk about first those other 18 states where it's not, right? It's illegal in all in some ways except for Mexico City, but many have exemptions, right? They have certain reasons for which you can say, oh, I can legally have abortion. After Mexico City had this courageous action, I think, of legalizing abortion or decriminalizing it, 18 states changed their constitutions so that the state constitution, including the one of Guanajuato, says that the fertilized human egg is a person with the right to legal protection, right? And so now, it's not only just in the criminal code, right? Previously, all these things about abortion were in the criminal codes of each state. But now, it's in the Constitution, and so abortion is murder, it's infanticide, you're killing a baby, right? And that's the attitude here in Guanajuato, which is why some say there is the rumor, yes, if you come back to Guanajuato and somebody finds out, you can be arrested for having committed murder in another state, because murder anywhere is murder everywhere, right? So those are legal issues that are still being sorted out. I don't know, do you know of a specific case that had happened to people that actually did get arrested after having an abortion elsewhere? Okay.
No.
So, but yeah, I know that there are a lot of lawyers working on these issues who are discussing these things. So as a result, you do have women, girls, and doctors, and other healthcare professionals, and feminists from different organizations who are in prison. And sadly, this state is one of the ones that has had one of the worst reputations for that. And amazingly, fabulous women working, as Trish and others pointed out, to change that, right? To get people out of prison and to change the laws. So a lot of work has to happen still. Let me just jump to. You know what? I'll go ahead and answer your question now before I forget about why Mexico City politics, why that was different. Was that the question?
Yes.
Okay. So, I think, first of all, Mexico City is a very, very progressive city. It historically has been, on all kinds of different issues, López Obrador, whether you like him or not, the PRD candidate, and then later Convergencia, for president, he was the mayor of Mexico City, so they had this leftist, socialist-leaning politician who was essentially the governor of, if you want to call it, the state of the city of Mexico, right? And so there's always been this progressive leanings, but you also had some really important things happening. You had just huge, you had protests against the legalization of abortion, but you also had huge protests in favor of decriminalizing abortion. And you had a situation where you have some very progressive churches, and this is coming back to the earlier question, I think the gentleman has, oh, you're still here, yeah. So within the Catholic Church, you had a movement of Latin American liberation theology that is not in line with the conservative ideas of the hierarchy of the Catholic Church. So they disagree with most of the cardinals, including the Cardinal of Mexico City and many of the bishops. There's a handful of liberationist bishops, but most aren't. But you have this group, this wave of people, many of them were in Mexico City, working in very poor parts of Mexico City, working on social justice issues. And once you start working on social justice, well, reproductive rights kind of sneaks in there, right? Like these things are all linked. So they start to look at gender, they start to look at violence, they start to realize, oh, we need to advocate for this. And I will talk about it more later on, but a really significant group that's national, but started in Mexico City, is Catholics for Free Choice, or as it is in Spanish, Catholics for the Right to Decide, right? Because they say deciding isn't just about the choice of having an abortion or not, it's about deciding about what you want to do with your life, whether or not you want to have a sexual partner, if so, of what gender, whether or not you want to have kids, it's all the decisions of your life, if you want an education, right? So they're really about women's empowerment, but within that, they're also about legal abortion as being one of the big issues. So you have this group that dares to say, we're Catholic, and and this is important to us, and we believe in reproductive rights. And that was, for those who were here in the country at the time, or in Mexico City, or listening to things on the radio, it was scandalous. The Cardinal Norberto Rivera in Mexico City got on the radio and had these press conferences and said, all these women involved in Catholics for the Right to Decide, they're all excommunicated. And then Vatican lawyers, who were friends with other Catholic lawyers, said, you know what, actually, the Cardinal can't do that, because that's not how excommunication happens in the Catholic Church. Canon law doesn't allow for that. He has to have the actual names of each individual, and there's a whole process that has to happen that's kind of a trial within the Catholic Church system, right? So during this whole period of this battle for the decriminalization of abortion, there have been Catholic priests and a few Catholic nuns in Mexico who have been not excommunicated, but basically told that they could no longer be a priest or nun unless they were willing to go back to seminary and take new vows of obedience and change their stance, right? And I know some of them. Francisco Castillo was one in Mexico City, priest who was very active supporting Catholics for the right to decide. And the second time he got called to the Vatican, he just said, you guys are violating canon law. I know I'm a good Catholic, but if you don't want me to be a priest anymore, fine, And people in the neighborhood of Mexico City where he lives, they still see him as the priest, even though he doesn't lead Mass or do any of those things, right? So, those religious debates and battles have been super, super important. And I think that the work that they've done is helping break this myth that we saw, not that it was a myth in the movie about Guatemala, but the myth that often exists in Mexico, that if you're Catholic, you're automatically against the use of contraception except for the rhythm method, and you're automatically against abortion, et cetera, right? Because that's simply not the case. And they started doing all these surveys, national surveys of Catholics, trying to find out what did Catholics think. And most Catholics did not agree with the official teachings of the church. And they've been doing these repeatedly, and I'll share the results of one of them that was more recent a little bit further on. But also the Protestant churches, when some of us founded evangelical and Protestants for the right to decide, there was this huge press conference. It was at the point where I was getting my Mexican citizenship. It was like, okay, I don't want to get deported. So but I see my role as more in the background, helping to write things, helping to educate people, helping them look at what some of the arguments that they can use are, whether it's from the Bible if they're Protestants or other arguments if they're Catholic. But how can they, from their faith tradition, make some arguments? And it was really exciting, but there were newspaper articles calling Rebecca Montemayor and Angela Trejo and some of the others who spoke at the press conference, Mexican women, calling them pastoras asesinas. They were the assassin pastors, right? because they were in support of abortion rights, right? So, just a lot of stuff, but I think all those things came together at a time to just say, yeah, this is what has to happen. And I don't know, that was a really long answer to your question. I hope that I gave
That's
a
great.
okay response.
And
Yes.
how does the traditional religious establishment answer the argument that they're saying it's illegal to, or it's
Immoral, unethical,
immoral, yes,
moral sin.
to kill a child or prevent, but even use contraception.
Yeah.
Well, what about the responsibility that we have to take care of children? How do they answer
Exactly.
that?
Well, most of the time in my experience, and this is my bias, I think they don't, right? I think they avoid it. But the women from Catholics for the Right to Decide and other groups are saying, we're about life in abundance, right? It's not just pro-life, we're pro-life too, right? We're for the life of women who make a decision that the way I can give the best life to my children, as we saw in the film about Guatemala, the best way I can give them a full life with education and food, etc., is by not having another child. Right? But it's really hard with the hierarchy. I know a lot of Catholic groups that have tried to have those dialogues, and Catholics for the Right to Decide and many other groups, there were groups of Franciscans, of Dominicans, and other progressive orders of nuns and monks here in Mexico who tried to meet with Pope Francis when he was here, and he wouldn't meet with them. And they wrote a long letter, they wrote an open letter that they published, you can find a lot of stuff on the internet. He wouldn't deal with it. He just didn't want to. And that's not to say there aren't a lot of good things about him, but when it comes to this issue, I personally don't think so. And my friends who are Catholic, many of them are very critical. They said on one hand, okay, maybe sounded like a good thing. Then in the winter he said, for 1 month, women who have had abortions can be forgiven, right? Did you remember reading about that or hearing about it? But it was 1 month, right? And this is the year of mercy, so maybe you can extend it into this year, but then what happens after that, right? And it's still starting with the assumption that it's a mortal sin, right? So it's really problematic in a lot of ways. It's not perhaps nearly as bad as some previous popes, but many of the feminist Catholics I know don't see it as a huge success, right? But they are still trying to have dialogues with these people, So, and then I think in the film about Guatemala, it was great to see the Baptist pastor, the evangelical pastor, and here we're seeing more and more of them because they are making the connections to poverty. And one thing that in Mexico, I think a lot of evangelical groups do very well is reaching out in terms of education in extremely poor communities and a lot of indigenous rural communities in mountainous areas of Guerrero and Oaxaca and Chiapas and elsewhere. And, they're often not as conservative as people think, right? Even some of the Pentecostal groups, which have had the reputation. I've been to women's retreats and women's conferences where Pentecostal women have been there and they're talking about contraceptions, right? So, and they ask, they're like, we don't know how to do this, but can others of you come? Can we get an ecumenical group to come and train us, so that we can use our own language, because people know us and we speak in tongues, we do it our way, but train us so that we can then adapt it and do these sex education and contraception workshops for women and men in our congregations, right? So I think that's pretty amazing. Okay, so as I mentioned before, there are exceptions to the illegality of abortion in Mexico. Most states have at least one clause, as they call it. In all states, there is a legal exemption in the case of rape and forced artificial insemination without the consent of the woman, right? So even Guanajuato at least has that on the criminal code, but it also, at the same time, has this constitutional amendment that says that the life of a person begins with conception. Right? So this is also a legal battle because what the state is really holding up is the constitutional amendment about personhood starting with the fetus, and they're kind of ignoring this criminal code which says, but if a woman is raped, she does have the right to have a legal abortion. And so these things are at play. And that's, again, why groups like Las Libres are so important in what they're doing, because they have a team of lawyers and they're working on these issues. And I think one of the big networks around the nation is of lawyers who are supporting sexual and reproductive rights, trying to help each other in looking at a lot of these kinds of questions. Other exemptions in many states, but not all, if the mother's life is at risk, then she can have a legal abortion. But again, many states don't provide the opportunity. Women don't know it. There's not information or access. And women have had the experience, I know in our state of Morelos, where this is one of the exemptions. I know of cases of women who have gone and they have serious health risks, you know, if they continue to full term, and the doctors refuse. Like, but I have a right, you know, and then they have to get a lawyer involved. Most people can't afford to do that, right? So these things exist on paper, but in practice, it's a whole nother story, right? And then also serious fetal deformities that would not allow the fetus to survive outside the womb. What do you think might be one of the obstacles to people actually following through on this?
The lack of the ability to figure out whether the fetus has a problem or not.
Exactly, right? So if you don't, especially if you're in a rural area and you're poor and you don't have a good, well-funded government clinic that's free, you know, where are you going to go and find out? And probably that free clinic, most of these clinics I know, you know, don't have ultrasound. So how are you going to know these things? How are you going to detect it, right? Especially more serious kinds of things. And also, there are some states that actually have clauses stating deformities such as brain damage or Down syndrome and things like that do not count, right? And there's ethical issues around that. In the Yucatan, I thought this was really interesting. This is the only state in the country where, in addition to some of these other exemptions, abortion is legally permitted if the mother is economically desperately poor, is the language that they have, and she already has at least 3 children. So they're at least recognizing, you know, this is important for women's lives to not end up with 14 children when somebody's really, really poor. I mean, for anybody, that's a big choice, right? Something interesting about the penal codes, the criminal codes that the abortion laws are in, is that most of them are at least 70 years old, right? So a lot of these things need to be rewritten. Members of Congress need to know that they're there in some cases, and you know, big time for reform.
Do you have people in your Congress that are under 70 that would actually recognize this should be done?
Yes, we do.
That's good.
Yeah. In our state we do, but right now the PRI is in power, and they've kind of waffled on this a lot. It's not, the PON generally, most of the time, the National Action Party is opposed to abortion. They've tended to side with the hierarchy of the Catholic Church, whereas the PRD and some of the other more left-leaning parties have tended to be more pro-abortion rights, etc. And the PRI really varies on where you are. In our state, you know, our new mayor, you guys probably heard about, Cuauhtemoc Blanco. He was the futbolista, the soccer champ, who ran with the slogan, you know, we're the party of winners. But then in one of his very first political rallies, he was shouting from the stage, "Vote for the PRD." He wasn't from the PRD. He was from the Socialist Republican Party, not the Democratic Republican Party, or sorry, Democratic Party, the Socialist Democratic Party, the PSD. So yeah, so we don't necessarily have the brightest and the best governing right now, but there are people who are really committed to trying to push these things through. You know, we might see some changes. Okay, so worldwide, you guys may be familiar with these statistics. The WHO says that there's over 68,000 women a year worldwide who die of unsafe abortions. Okay, so this is a public health issue, and it's a women's right to life and abundance issue. They call unsafe abortion the preventable pandemic. In Mexico City, prior to the decriminalization of abortion in 2007, clandestine abortions were the 3rd largest cause of death of women, right? Sadly, feminicide was over that, right? Murder of women, usually by their male partners. But now it's dropped to 5th place. So they still have a long way to go, but it's changing, right? Nationally, it's estimated that clandestine abortions are still the third largest cause of death among women. So I see it as a basic human right. Sorry, this slide isn't very good. I took it from another source of a women's organization, but it gave information about the deaths of teenage women between the ages of 15 and 19 who died through clandestine abortions. And it's the fourth leading cause of death among young women in that age group. So I think that's pretty powerful. So health risks. So pretty much same in many parts of the world, right? Hemorrhaging, sepsis, peritonitis, trauma to the cervix, the uterus, the vagina. What else? Some of you are probably medical doctors and nurses and physician's assistants, right? Other things you're familiar with. It's an ugly way to go. These are pretty ugly ways to go. Can we get the lights back on?
Luces otra vez.
Luces.
Está dormido.
So, am I losing everybody? I'm so sorry. We're almost done for those who are still here. So look at what you're getting, figure out what it is.
I was wondering one thing.
There's a question here.
I was wondering one
Yeah.
thing. I'm a Canadian physician.
And
Yeah.
And I just wondered what the response of the medical association here is to the incarceration of these medical doctors, whether
There's been strong support. Yeah, the medical doctors have really, had a good alliance in terms of trying to support the doctors who've been incarcerated. Because they realize any one of them could end up in that situation. So, one more person who wants to accept these nice pungent herbs. Keep them in that. Okay, so people can just stand up and show us what you have in your hand and how it's used, what it does. This is my graphic part of the presentation, right?
Do we have lights in the room, you think?
We can't get attention of the people up in the light
You
booth.
can't see each other. Sorry, I can see you there.
Well, we can see each other.
Okay.
We can see each other.
Okay.
So people can take turns. You want to start?
Yes. Knitting needle.
Ooh.
a knitting needle.
Yeah. So these are commonly used in Mexico because in a lot of communities there are people who knit. Right? Hanger. One of the easiest accessible, cheaper than
Crocheting.
Chili peppers.
Huh? Oh, that's like turpentine. Yes, these are all used for clandestine abortions. When people do not have access to safe legal abortion, or they can't afford to pay for an illegal abortion, which is very, very expensive in most states. And so these are the kinds of things that people turn to.
Rat poison.
Yes, these are all documented by the National Alliance for Reproductive and Rights in Mexico City.
What is this herb? I don't know.
It's one that's used to provoke abortions, basically. And there are curanderas, they're natural healers, who've used these for centuries. And in many of the pre-Columbian indigenous cultures, there actually was not only a goddess of fertility, there was a goddess of sexuality, sexual pleasure, and there was a goddess of abortion, right? So I think, ancient cultures recognize that sometimes this is a need. Curanderas who are well trained often know what quantities to use. The problem is that these herbs can be completely toxic and kill you if you don't know the quantity, if you're not supervised. And so, yeah.
Are they made into a tea? Or?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How much does an abortion cost?
It depends on where you are, and it depends on the organization. In Morelos, right now in Cuernavaca, and different towns around us, I know somebody just last week was telling me that it cost 5,000 pesos. Imagine if you are poor, you cannot afford 5,000 pesos. I actually taught once a few years ago a colleague of mine who already had 5 children. Her oldest was 19, and her oldest was pregnant and dropping out of high school, which broke her heart, right? And then a month after her daughter found out she was pregnant, Isabel found out that she was pregnant with her 6th child. And this is a dirt poor family, right? And they take care of the mother, a mentally retarded brother. I apologize if that's not the correct term. But, they had so many challenges. And she came and she talked to me because she knew that I do this stuff, right? That's how she referred to it. And she's from a very Catholic family, and they're also members of the National Action Party, right-wing party. But she was really considering it, and so she asked me to find out what it would cost, and I talked to somebody I knew through a women's organization clinic, because a lot of times, feminist organizations they can't advertise that they're doing this because it's illegal in the States, right? But that through the network, people can find out informally. Well, they said in her case, they could bring it down as low as 3,000. And I remember talking to the doctor and said, but this woman has practically no money, and I'm willing to, give her money. But, what form are you using? Are you doing suction? Are you doing the medication? No, we're using the pill. And I was furious because I know that particular organization gets a lot of free pills donated by feminist organizations in the U.S. and Canada and other places. But then she said to me, and I think about it, the doctor said, but I not only have to make sure that she doesn't have any complications or anything, I have to be on call, but if I get caught for having done this, even though it was just a pill I gave her, not only would I lose my medical license, but I would go to jail. And so I charge that because it's kind of building up my lawyer's fee if anything ever happens to me. And, so who am I to judge, Yeah. Anyway,
How do they use rat poison and chili peppers and
what do people think? Bleach, yeah. What do you think people do with the bleach, with the rat poison, with chili peppers? How do those get used?
Put in their uterus.
Some people will put them in directly, and sometimes like a turkey baster. But instead of trying to be, do in vitro, like they're inject it right into the area that they want to knock off, right? Other people will ingest it, and so just imagine what it does to internal organs. I have heard some of the most horrendous stories, and I'm sure that many of you did growing up in the United States too. I'm sure or Canada or wherever you live. Were any of you part of the movement for trying to fight for abortion rights in the United States? All right, thank you to all of you who did that. So I'm from a different generation, but I'm thankful to those of you who went ahead.
I was going to say that I grew up near the border,
Yeah.
and in Juarez they had fairly nice clinics for
Yeah.
American women to come down and have abortions. I mean,
Okay.
from the 60s
Wow.
at least on.
So those would have been clandestine. I mean, people probably knew about it through networks, but they weren't legal.
Right, and then
Yeah.
there was always talk of the number of women from California that lost their lives
Wow.
going down to Tijuana and places.
Wow.
So.
Very sad. Thank you.
So you talked about the fact that some of these clinics are funded by the government. Is there any Planned Parenthood-like organization attempting to establish itself in Mexico?
There's a French-based organization. Somebody help me out here if I slaughter this. Marie Watt, that basically works around the world in helping fund things like that. And Planned Parenthood definitely has relationships with some organizations around the country. But in terms of having clinics and that kind of thing, yeah. I think the focus so far has mostly been on trying to have the education and the access for people.
Sure.
But yeah, that's the next thing to happen, I'm sure. So, did anybody have another item that you wanted to share? Did they all get shared? I apologize, if that makes any of us a little sick to our stomachs, but I think it just makes us remember how real this issue is, right? Okay, I just have a couple more things I want to share, then we'll end. We were talking about this whole issue of religion. In the 2014 National Catholic Survey, it was found that 57% of women said that they should be the ones to decide whether or not they would have an abortion, that the government shouldn't do that. At the same time, however, only 18% of women said that everybody should just automatically have the right to abortion. Right? So that's why I think it's really important that there are groups like Catholics for Free Choice and other religious institutions that are trying to help people think through their own faith tradition. Not reject it, if that's your tradition, great, respect that. But people who are from that same tradition saying, okay, there are some other ways of looking at this here. There's other ways to understand this. But again, the majority of the women or men and women, said that abortion should at least be legal in certain circumstances, right? And that there should be access. That the Mexican bishops have played a really huge role. Like I said, there's a few who are not conservative, a few who are really progressive. But as a whole, the Mexican bishops came up with, one of the elections, somebody might remember, they had a list of the 10 electoral sins, kind of like the 10 Commandments. And their 10 electoral sins included, it's a sin to vote for a candidate or a party that kills babies, right? It is a sin to vote for an individual or a party that supports the marriage of, or I forget how they said it, but basically same-sex marriage, right? So, and they printed those out in bulletins. So any of you who go to churches or synagogues or places where they have a bulletin, well, they had that as the insert. So, people would go, and for a month or so, any mass you would go to, you'd get this information from the Catholic bishops that, it was a sin to vote for this. So a lot of cultural pressure, a lot of religious pressure, even though there are others, trying to change it from within. So of the different organizations, local ones, I mentioned Las Libres here. I love their logo, very free women who were jumping. Despite all the things that they have been through, what an incredibly, brave group of people. Ser Mujer, the group here, in Cuernavaca, the first women's organization was CIDAL, and they've always been really good at helping channel women to appropriate places for all different kinds of things. And then the newest group that just started last year is called the Divulgadoras. Anybody notice in here a certain Right, so it's got vulva in it, right? Yeah. And so they kind of played with it but it was like we want to divulgar is to share information or spread, but then to play with, the whole sexual, we want to appreciate our sexuality. And that organization is almost all, it's high school and college students and very young adults. So it's really awesome to see them doing street theater and starting to do murals and doing workshops in high schools and junior highs and things like that. Oh, I went the wrong direction. And then, so some of the biggest national organizations, the National Alliance I mentioned, ANDAR, it's kind of the umbrella organization for pretty much anybody else who wants to be affiliated with them around the country. So in the vast majority of the states of the country, north to south. And some of the big members that are also national organizations, DDCER, the Network for Reproductive Rights, Sexual and Reproductive Rights, and they're in, I think, 16 different states. Católicas por el Derecho a Decidir, I mentioned, Catholics for the Right to Decide, and they're in at least 18 states. HIRE, the group of reproductive choice and information, is there. And then Catholics for the Right to Decide also has a youth group of the National Network of Catholic Youth for the Right to Decide. And they're all over the country, and they have been working for the last many years with many different indigenous groups in Chiapas and Oaxaca and Puebla. So they're at Sautal, they're at Tzotzil, and it's been really fun to engage with some of these young people in workshops and things, and coming from their communities, and they're going back and doing workshops in their communities and doing radio shows. And, and most of them are, Catholic and really seriously involved in their churches. And they're the ones who teach catechism to the kids. And they're getting on the radio and they're talking about reproductive rights in their own languages, right? So in the workshops, they always have translators from Celtal and Tzotzil and Tojolobal, et cetera, which is really awesome to see. They do, I get quite a bit of funding from the Ford Foundation. And I think they might get some from Planned Parenthood, I'm not sure. I think EFOS gets funding from Planned Parenthood International as well. So yeah, some wonderful organizations that you can look up on the web and that Ser Mujer and other groups can relate to. They've got great resources. One of the things they decided to do when they created ANDAR, the National Alliance, is that they didn't want, especially it was around the lobbying for the new law in Mexico City in 2007, the couple years leading up to that, they said, we need to unite forces. We need the lawyers from all these different organizations, we need to do some strategic planning, we need to do lobbying together, we can't be at odds, like we have to have a common agenda, and they really did a great job with that media stuff. And then, especially some of the younger folks doing these things, I love it. People as simple as, the state doesn't decide here, right? Written on your belly. And then flashing people just with that at a traffic light or something, right? So they can do or these, abortion yes, abortion no. This is what I decide, right? So people go into lots of different places having those. And then these, I aborted to finish my studies. I aborted because I was raped. So public education, very visible kinds of things. And young people love doing stuff like that.
Does the establishment respond any better to an argument that says, well, we need contraception because it will prevent this horrible sin of abortion?
Yeah, I think so.
And do the
But not in the
statistics
Catholic
bear
Church,
that
though.
out?
You mean the
Do we have
the
fewer
government?
abortions? No, well, do the statistics bear it out? Do we have fewer abortions when there's more contraception to use?
I would assume
Well, you
so. I
think
don't
so,
know.
but-
I can't cite a study, but I'm sure I've heard a whole bunch of them.
And they don't want.
Somebody here probably can cite some research on that, or but yeah, I think that's been pretty well documented. That when contraceptive methods are available, the number of abortions, including both legal and illegal, go down. But there will still be some, right?
Well, the use of the pill,
Yeah.
the medicinal abortion has
Yeah.
lowered the number of surgical abortions. by
Yes.
quite a bit.
Yes. And I think the existence of from what I hear anecdotally, I don't have statistics on this, but the morning after pill, which is legal in Mexico and you can buy in most pharmacies, it's supposed to be available in some of the government health clinics, but it's usually not. I think what I have heard is that has also helped bring down the number of unwanted pregnancies. And all those things are against the official teachings of the Catholic Church, because the only thing that's actually allowed is the rhythm method. But I had one progressive Catholic priest tell me, oh yeah, there are more children of the rhythm method than there are children of God. So, there's not just one way of thinking within the Catholic Church, it's why. So I think this is the last one, or next to last. One of the things that I enjoy about the National Network of Catholic Youth for the Right to Decide is they have started working very closely with their healthcare systems in the different states where they are. So Chiapas and Oaxaca and Puebla and Morelos, et cetera. And so what they do, first sometimes they'll kind of go in as spies, and they'll go and they'll pretend that they want information about sex education, or they want contraceptions or things like that. But really they're there to find out, like, how are we treated? Do they have the information? Do they have the contraceptives? Like, what can we get? And then later they go back, and then they have meetings with the doctors and others in these clinics and say, we would love to share this information with you, not because we want to attack you, but because all of us want things to get better. We know that you are health professionals and you want to be better too. And so they call it salud amigable, friendly health services. And what they really mean is especially friendly towards teenagers, because teenagers around the country have had a hard time, especially in rural areas, getting the kind of information that they want and need, right? Or contraceptives, et cetera. And so they feel so excited about this that it's really been very, very successful. And they go back sometimes after 6 months and they'll test it out. They'll send some other people in as guinea pigs to kind of see, spies. Is it getting better? And of course it hasn't improved everywhere. You're sometimes going to have some jerks, right? But I think it's an interesting approach. And then another thing they do, they like to have these stop signs and stuff. And so they'll go out into the middle of, during a stoplight. They'll go out to the traffic and they'll hold these up, and then people will go to the car windows and they'll hand out water bottles that have their logo on it, and then full of information about the abortion law in Mexico City, about abortion in wherever they are, and condoms and things like that. So I think the creativity of people is always awesome to see. So this is, So with the same network, one of the things that they have that I encourage you to check on the web under YouTube or their own website is the Catolicadas, right? So they take the name of Catholics and they have these cartoons. And this guy here, this is Padre Beto. He's actually entre nos, among us. He's, so Beto is a nickname for Norberto. Well, the Cardinal of Mexico City, who's really, really right-wing, who said they were all excommunicated, right? Beto, right? He's Norberto, so Beto. And then this is Sor Juana. Anybody know of Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz?
Sure.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so great feminist, right, 1600s. And so this nun, she's the progressive voice, and she's the feminist voice. And so they have, now they have tons of them. They have ones on, many on abortion, for all different kinds of reasons. They have lots of stuff on violence. They have a lot of stuff on sexuality, lots of stuff on condoms and contraceptions and same-sex relations, and again, it's all from this liberal Catholic perspective of saying you can still be Catholic and totally disagree with the hierarchy of the church, right? And you can fight for your reproductive and sexual rights. So interesting stuff. And then this is the end, is just to ask you, especially for those present who aren't Mexican citizens, what can you do and what are you doing to legally work for sexual and reproductive rights while you're here in this country, right? How can you work together with Mexican women or women and men to bring about change?
So what's the answer?
Well, that's what I'm here from you.
Answers.
I just wanted to mention that Mujer sin Cambio, one way, giving girls an education, that's happening now worldwide. By the time they get to 20 or 21 without having been pregnant, they are much more self-empowered to make decisions about that. So to me, first it's the education.
And most studies do show that the higher the level of education, the more people postpone pregnancy. But not always happen.
The demographics in Mexico have changed quite a bit. I remember when I was young on the border that Mexico had one of the highest birth rates anywhere. And now it's down below 3, isn't it? And what has anyone done studies on how that's happened? Is it mostly condoms and low-cost forms of contraception, or?
That is my understanding. Again, I can't quote a particular research set, but my understanding is that when the government decided that, or came to the conclusion, whatever, that poverty was directly linked to birth rates, that they started to decrease that by really pushing for the availability of contraceptives, et cetera, and kind of a campaign. I think almost more a public campaign that you should plan your family. Which is why I think here, Catholics and Protestant people tend to have very different attitudes than other countries such as Guatemala, because there's also been this kind of whole strong government campaign supporting, yes, you can take these things into your own hands. He's first.
Excuse me, so you turn this fan off.
Oh, they're on the wall there. Can you figure it out?
No, I have a comment. I think, to answer your question, also is because women are more open to what information they need or they choose to listen. And recent studies has been proved that Mexican women in the cities, in larger cities, are down to 2.1 children per family because of their studies. Because they want to continue their race of knowledge and education. So besides the contraceptive methods and stuff, I think highly choosing of what they are receiving from media or newspapers or books or even person-to-person information is very valuable to them, and because they search for human rights equality among men between women also.
Thank you. Somebody back here. Go ahead.
I have a little bit of a connection with you because I helped start the community health worker certificate program at Minneapolis Community Technical College. So I want to know, I want an answer to the earlier question about whether or not when people go out into these community, when community health workers are out spreading the contraceptive message, are they being harassed in some of these countries? Are they being arrested or killed? And that
most definitely. And that's why they need support. And I think that the more both national and international attention people get sometimes, the more that it makes it safer for them to do what they're doing. What I have heard anecdotally from Guatemala is that yes, there have been a number of women like the ones we saw in the film who have been beaten up, or they've gotten threats, or even killed. And I have not heard of them being imprisoned by the government, but I've heard about harassment and other kinds of things. Some of that may be not because of what they're doing, but because they're young women out, in places, and the whole patriarchal control issue, and some of it may be because of what they're doing. I know from young people that I talk to, indigenous people in Chiapas and Oaxaca, and mestizo folks in Morelos and other places doing organizing, they hear what I tend to hear is more kind of burla, they get made fun of, and they get harassed, but they don't necessarily fear for their lives, or get beaten up physically, but they get, kind of put down, they get a lot of, they take a lot of crap, for lack of a better way to say it.
Okay, so then I have a follow-up question too. Okay, so we saw a lot about the fact, and it is women who get pregnant, but are there men who are willing to educate other men in the systems about this stuff?
Yes, some of the national networks and organizations and local ones of youth have a lot of men, like the Lutterman-Aguilar, have quite a few men in it, and so I think that's really great because the guys are, talking to younger guys, high school guys and stuff, and so they can relate. And with women, not only that, but really doing that conservatively. The National Network of Catholic Youth for the Right to Decide, they have really intentionally been as 50-50 as they could be in terms of male and female, and also really trying to have a whole geographical spread, although their strategy is to start with states that have these constitutional amendments. So they want to go after the most conservative places and try to kill them, which I thought, wow.
Yes,
okay. We probably have time for one last question, and I'm looking for inches to go.
In Canada, the province of Quebec is the most Catholic province, and it has the highest rate of common-law marriages and the lowest birth rate. So the fact that it's Catholic really has nothing, there's a reverse correlation.
It's fascinating.
So I guess what I'm wondering is, why aren't Mexicans leaving the Catholic Church in droves? I mean, if the policies around reproduction and women's rights and abortion are so repressive, why do they keep doing it?
Great question. I think 3 of us want to respond. So if you were first and you're second, Amy.
I think it's one main reason, media. Sorry. One main reason is media, because when there's a family in extreme poverty, it's their first priority to have a TV and drink Coke. Then, yeah, this is real. Then treat their children. And what they're receiving from the TV is all bought material from the government, so they can hypnotize people, so they can hide the real issues that the government is going through. I mean, not just in a matter of poverty and misleading women to abortion and contraception methods and education, but other stuff.
Thank you.
And I would like to say that many Catholics do not agree with the church, and I have a personal friend who said she's Catholic, but she only had 2 boys. She said, I want my boys to go to college, and she had her tubes tied. I'm not sure how she did that. But, and she said, I'm Catholic, but the church is wrong on this issue. So, there are Mexican women who believe that. Yeah.
One thing I want to say is in the colonias around here, the Catholic Church is not there. But there are evangelical Christians and Seventh-day Adventists that even divide neighborhoods, one side against the other. And I think that's why the Catholic Church doesn't have the manpower, woman power anymore to influence people quite so much.
Oh, yeah. The next one last time.
Well,
say that I'm Catholic and went through this question of contraception back in the 60s.
Yeah.
And it was a hugely difficult thing for women to say that they would not do what the church taught. And they just quietly did what they needed to do for their families. It was a development and maturity within the Catholic women to say, I'm still Catholic, but I'm just not going to follow that rule. And that just has become the case. The younger women don't even know about it.
Well, and I think that's what's happening here in Mexico. And I know a lot of Mexican women, Catholic women, who get asked that same question, and they say, you know, it's my culture, it's my faith, you know. It's like, who's the Pope to tell me I'm not Catholic? And Catholic means universal. And they'll often get very sophisticated. They're like, you know, so I'm not Roman Catholic, but I'm Catholic, right? So I'm a Mexican Catholic. So thank you everyone for coming.